Welcome back to Office Hours. I'm here with Chang, and we're in our 38th week of Office Hours. And let me just start by wishing you all a very happy and belated Thanksgiving, the festival that we've just had here in the United States. And if you have some good turkey recipes from outside of the United States that you would like us to try, do send them in. Thanksgiving in the United States is followed by a bizarre shopping frenzy that I've never quite understood called Black Friday. Lots of sales. Chang, is there anything like that in China?
Yes, in China we have Double 11 Day. So
Double 11 Day.
On November 11th, and it's called Singles Day. It was started by students in the university who are bachelors, and they wanted to celebrate their singlehood. But then it became a huge day for shopping, and a lot of times shopping online. So the Double 11 revenue actually for China this year is 4 times that of Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined. Oh
my goodness. All right. Well, I'd like to hear about bargains that people have had all over the world on these days. Some other news. 1,248 ChinaXers have passed Part 8. Congratulations. Some of you will have noticed there was a glitch in our process bar in the last week. This has been fixed and all the scores have been recovered, but we do apologize for the inconvenience. Chang, what other news do we have to share?
So there is an important deadline for Part 9. So the learners that want to earn an honor code certificate and or verified certificate, which includes sort of $90 fee, they need to sign up and also receive overall score of 75% or higher and to qualify as a passing grade. And they have to do this by Monday, December 29th.
Plenty of time, another whole month.
5 p.m.
Okay.
Right.
5 p.m. Okay. Very good. Well, we've had a lot of very interesting discussions of the module on the socialist elder brother, and thank you very much. And you're asking questions that people have been asking for a long time, really since the decade of the 1950s, the decade of this intense, really extraordinary cooperation between China and the Soviet Union, and an even more extraordinary and incredibly bitter falling out that would last from the early 1960s until the mid-1980s, mid and even almost to the late 1980s. And a number of you say, I would like more detail about this split. Is it really all Mao? Is he elevating himself into some rarefied role? What are some of the other reasons for the split? Among the reasons that one can think of are, of course, the different national interests of Russia and China, or the Soviet Union then and China, not perfectly congruent. They're ideological partners in the 50s. They have a common enemy in the United States, and the United States in many ways draws them closer together as a common enemy. But the Soviet Union seeks also accommodation with the United States in the 1950s, peaceful coexistence, as it was called, given that the alternative appeared to be the catastrophe of nuclear war. And the Chinese side, at the time at least, does not seek peaceful coexistence with the capitalist world or the imperialist world. There's probably another factor is that the Soviet Union is the elder brother, the founder of international communism, but it's also still a kind of a colonial power in China. Here's a Chinese government that declares that under Mao, China has just stood up, and yet Soviet citizens have de facto extraterritoriality. Soviet joint venture plants in Manchuria and in Xinjiang are really forms of continued colonial presence, one could say. And there is an aspect of this that reeks of an earlier period of Russian imperialism in China that would come also to be resented, even though Soviet help was essential and very important for China's economic development. Can you think of other reasons why there were tensions?
I think you're absolutely right with regard to the sort of the colonial image that Soviet Union presented to China. I think even at the diplomatic level, there were a lot of crass behavior demonstrated by Soviet advisors to China. I think it really did cause a rift at personal and at political levels between the two countries. And in terms of other disputes, I think one of them is ideological. I think you mentioned that already, but in terms of the de-Stalinization policies, the peaceful coexistence, I think on another level, I think Soviet Union had moved, actually in terms of economic development, moved to a sort of less sort of Stalinist approach. And it's much more moderate forms of economic development. But China and Mao especially did not want a much more moderate kind of development.
There are many, many reasons for things ultimately falling apart. Perhaps international communism could only have one leader from the Soviet point of view, and not easily as a movement. You have tensions, which we didn't talk about, but some of our learners pointed out. You had tensions over the Korean War. Both Stalin and Mao agreeing to allow Kim Il-sung to invade South Korea, but then Stalin not following through on the levels of support that the Chinese believed that they were promised. Mao Zedong himself taking a highly aggressive attitude toward the scope of China's involvement in the Korean War, which brings the war to a much greater crisis point internationally than the communist side had imagined at the beginning. We also asked you to describe the Soviet Union's legacy for contemporary China and the relationship between Russia and China today. Is it different from 1949, 1989? And you had some absolutely terrific answers. What does Doug Ma say?
He's saying that the relationship between Soviet Union and China is between two mutually suspicious states. And I think he argues that both are imperialist in intent and they're focused on expansion. So they're definitely they do not have any sort of ideological common ground.
Yeah, as he puts it, with some nuance here, the relationship between the two countries today is that between two separate mutually suspicious nation states. There are geostrategic tensions where these two empires meet in Central Asia and in the Far East. Neither side has an interest in pressing the other at the moment. They can cooperate when it's in their mutual interest, as over the recent energy deal. And he does not see this as much different than in 1989, when national interest, narrowly defined on both sides, had superseded their ideological community first, and then their ideological differences. And I think that's a very good point.
Ankor's response is very fascinating. He has a very good assessment of China's economic development, and he argues that it's much more subtle and sophisticated than that of Soviet Union's model of the 1950s.
Right. Angkor 1 writes in the political sphere, the Soviet Union bequeathed to China a conviction in the one-party state, and that the Communist Party takes precedence over the entire state apparatus. He notes also the Soviet model over the economy. But he also suggests that China's centralized control over the economy is far more subtle and sophisticated today than that of the Soviet Union's model of the 1950s, and giving great credit to Deng Xiaoping's introduction of market socialism in the late 1970s. Now, he also says, what's the nature of the relationship today? And here's, I think, a pretty good point. If the relationship of the 1950s was one of which the Soviet Union was the elder brother, maybe today it's the other way around, that China has become the powerful elder brother with shared interests with the Soviet Union, less in socialism, but in reversing an international order still dominated, from their perspective or fear, by the United States as the sole remnant superpower.
So I was wondering, Professor Kirby, what do you think about the recent developments in Ukraine and China's role in the crisis? And I think a lot of sort of pundits and critiques have said that China actually, before they were cautious, saying China actually was suspicious of sort of the sovereignty violations of Ukraine, but now actually argues that China is actually benefiting from this crisis.
I think there are divided councils in China. Certainly no one in China sought a crisis over Ukraine or foresaw the Soviet invasion of Crimea. The idea of separating out nation states is not in China's national interest, whether you're in the period of the People's Republic or the period of the Republic or in the Qing. The belief in sovereign and intact and inviolable borders is really a central part of Chinese foreign relations from the beginning of interaction with the outside world in the period of the Opium War, of modern interaction with the outside world. And so sovereignty is the key to China's diplomatic goals, the defense of sovereignty. And so the destruction of part of Ukraine, the occupation, the forcible changing of borders, this is not a set of policies that is in line with China's perceived and pronounced national interests. That said, there is I don't know if it's equally strong, but a belief that you have a choice or a tipping point in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, between a Ukraine that would be more solidly in a Western camp and more solidly in a non-Western, not necessarily an Eastern camp, but more solidly within the Russian sphere. And I think the Chinese decision has been to allow the Russians to control their sphere of influence over Ukraine, and hence China's de facto diplomatic silence on the loss of Ukrainian territory and the loss of Ukrainian sovereignty in part of eastern Ukraine today. I don't think it's a situation that fills China with confidence, however, about Russia today.
Do you think that China has become the elder brother to Soviet Union?
How has China become the elder brother to the Soviet Union today, or to Russia today? I think in many ways it has. You have a China that appears, I mean, both countries appear to the outside world to be self-confident and powerful. And yet China is the second largest economy in the world. China has an economy that has great resilience because it makes things that the rest of the world wants to buy. The Russian economy will rise and fall with energy prices and natural resource prices. China makes things that the rest of the world wants. Russia sells things that the rest of the world needs, but the prices are highly volatile on the Russian side. Second, China has the continued great advantage of overseas Chinese continuing to invest talent and capital back in China. When people leave Russia, as far as I can tell, they really leave Russia, and they don't go back. I think if we look at this relationship 20 years from now, Russia will still be a great power, militarily, without question. But China will be a global power in every dimension beyond what one can imagine for the Russia of 2025 or 2035.
Thank you.